This is Ellen Tilden presenting our collaborative study with researchers from Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon, and the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. Among the body of labor progress literature, the latent phase of labor has received relatively less attention. Our purpose was to characterize duration of spontaneous latent phase of labor from the onset of painful contractions until 5 centimeters of cervical dilation, and examine the association between duration of the latent phase and perinatal processes and outcomes during the active first and second stages of labor, delivery, and immediate postpartum. We analyzed maternal child cohort data, including those who birthed in the Stockholm-Gotland regions of Sweden between 2008 and 2020. We included those without a prior cesarean and in spontaneous labor with a term, singleton, live, and vertex fetus without major malformations. The onset of a latent phase duration variable in this cohort was defined as the laboring person's self-reported time that painful contractions began. This definition correlates with findings from this 2016 systematic review regarding latent onset definitions. We chose to define the end of the latent phase as 5 centimeters of cervical dilation to correspond with the recently published World Health Organization partograph. The primary outcome was labor dystocia diagnosis during active phase or second stage. Secondary outcomes included labor interventions commonly associated with labor dystocia and morbidity markers. Based on patterns noted in our prior work, we also examined fetal position at delivery. Because people are admitted to the hospital at varying stages of labor, and there is also variation in when cervical examinations occur, some of these observations in the data were missing the time that the cervix is 5 centimeters dilated. We used multiple imputation approaches to estimate these missing times and then performed sensitivity analysis to confirm the robustness of the imputation. Subsequently, we described the duration of latent phase and used logistic regression to estimate the relationship between duration and maternal child outcomes. Our data set included over 300,000 dyads, and after exclusions, our final study population consisted of 41,545 nullips and 25,722 multips. Most of the people in this sample were white and identified as Swedish. They were younger than 35, married and partnered, and low risk for intervention. Similar to prior research, Nulliparous latent phase duration was longer than Multivariable latent phase duration at each point of distribution. Our overall time duration estimates were longer than much of the prior latent phase duration research. However, this is likely because these data included the latent phase time prior to hospital admission. Among Nulliparous people with latent phase duration longer than the median, adjusted odds showed higher risk for diagnosis of dystocia and interventions to address dystocia in active labor or second stage. We also noted that those with latent phase beyond the median more frequently birthed a child in the occiput posterior position, and though we did not see a relationship between latent phase duration and postpartum hemorrhage, we did see that nullips with latent phase duration greater than the 75th percentile more frequently had clinical chorioamnionitis. Those with latent phase duration greater than the 90th percentile had a low absolute risk but significant relative risk for low APGARs or NICU admission. Multivarious outcome patterns related to diagnosis of dystocia and interventions to address dystocia in active labor or second stage were quite similar to nulliparous patterns. Those with latent phase duration greater than the 90th percentile more frequently had clinical chorioamnionitis, and those with latent phase durations between the median and 75th percentile had relatively higher risk for postpartum hemorrhage and NICU admission. Study strengths include the large sample size, prospectively and uniformly collected data, lower risk of selection or misclassification bias through imputation of when the cervix reached 5 centimeters of dilation, and reassuring sensitivity analyses results. Study weaknesses are that these data do not include information about acceleration of cervical dilation that prior research suggests may more accurately mark active phase onset than cervical dilation alone. These data also lack information about the timing of labor interventions. And this population experienced relatively frequent labor interventions, which may limit generalizability of results. Study findings echo multiple prior latent phase studies in demonstrating that nullips experience on average longer latent labor than multips. Results also provide an estimate for latent phase duration when onset is defined as the start of painful contractions. Regardless of parity, longer latent phase was associated with greater diagnosis of dystocia and dystocia-related interventions, as well as clinical chorioamnionitis during the active phase and second stage. And nullips with a posterior presenting fetus at birth had longer latent phase. Considered together, these findings suggest several new research directions. For example, we're wondering if progress during the latent phase influences the entire duration of labor. Findings also raise questions about potential risk mediators that might help explain why some laboring dyads can safely tolerate a very long labor process, while others cannot. Finally, we are also curious about the directionality of relationships between latent phase duration and clinical chorioamnionitis, as well as nulliparous fetal occiput posterior position. Do these factors make latent labor longer, or does longer latent labor increase risk for infection or contractions that are insufficient to turn a fetus into the occiput anterior position?